Up to the top of the hour, so just like to welcome everyone officially to our webinar, which is Best Practices in Workforce Management. So a whole range of resource planning and workforce management areas we're going to be looking at today. And just like to introduce you our speakers. We've got a very distinguished panel with us today. Delighted to introduce back for, I think this must be your 7th webinar with us, Penny. Penny Reynolds is the founder of the call center school. Welcome, welcome, Penny.
Thank you, Jonty. Happy to be here again.
And you're going to be taking us through a number of best practices in workforce management, and you'll be covering a sort of a range of subjects, I guess. We
have a wide variety today, a little bit of everything this morning.
Wonderful. And we're going to be joined by Megan from the Call Center Helper News Desk, who's going to be monitoring the chat room and taking us through your top tips and questions. And two industry professionals, Dean Couchman and Chris Dealey. Welcome, Dean, and welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much.
So,
thanks, Jonty. Great to be here.
Wonderful. And just a reminder, if you're not into the chat room, callcenterhelp.com/chat. There will be a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. If you want to watch the replay, callcenterhelp.com/recorded webinars, and white paper will be going out after the webinar. So just the chat room. Once you're logged in, if you want to click this button here, download webinar slides, then you can get access to all of the slides that we've been using, and then you can also download the chat log at the end of the webinar. So just like to start off with a poll, and I'd just like to, since we're going to be talking later about forecasting, like to see how do you generate your forecasts. Do you do it manually, and you can select more than one vote on here. Do you do it manually? Do you use spreadsheets? Do you use workforce management software? Do you use other software applications? And maybe do you use a pen, paper, and a bendy ruler to get a line of best fit? Maybe use a combination of different techniques. So it'd be interesting to see if you could vote on how you generate your forecasts. So I think we've got most of you voting in there. So I'm just going to close the votes and share the results up on the screen. So we've got 55% using spreadsheets, 34% using workforce management software, 9% doing it manually. No one's using other software applications like a forecasting application. Only 2% are using pen, paper, and ruler and a line of best fit. Penny, what's your take on the results?
Well, that's pretty much what I would expect to see. You know, it's nice that a third of the group out there has workforce management software to do this, but honestly, sometimes even with workforce management software in place, a lot of folks still rely on the spreadsheets and their own processes internally. So that's a pretty common sort of breakdown there.
Chris, I've been trying to build some spreadsheets forecasts recently, and I keep on coming back to, you know, effectively plotting out a line of best fit myself. So a little bit surprised that only 2% of people are using a sort of line of best fit to back things up. Does that surprise you?
Maybe not, to be honest, because it is amazing what you can do with Excel, and I think there's a big overlap between the people with the with the talent to be doing planning in call centers and contact centers and being a proficient user of Excel. So I think that probably explains why that dwarf, the spreadsheet figure dwarfs the pen, paper, and ruler method.
I've certainly struggled, I must admit, trying to get hot winters established into Excel and get trend lines. It's quite challenging. So thanks very much for that. I now just want to drill down into the topic of today's webinar, and I'd like to ask an audience question. We're going to be looking at best practice for workforce management. So in 1 or 2 words, what is your biggest workforce management challenge? If you could type that into the chat room, please. What is your biggest workforce management challenge? And the sample size on the poll earlier was at 106. Alex said, I find our workforce management is not able to forecast correctly due to high volumes of dispatch demand we receive. Jill says it's leader buy-in to the workforce management process. Lee says fairness for all staff and for a good work-life balance. Alex says wider business engagement. Emma says small volume forecasting is a challenge. Greg says getting leadership on board. That seems to be a common process coming through. Matt Phil says absenteeism. James says back office forecasting. Sick leave, says Catherine. Adherence and planning for erratic arrival patterns. Matt says a perpetual, and I know, Penny, you're going to be talking about this later, multi-channel forecasting. Stuart says effectively scheduling inbound-outbound split due to highly center volumes. Andy says absenteeism, and Amy says resource availability and working patterns. So I guess we've got quite a range of different ones there, and Dean, sort of, there did seem to be a couple of people who talked about getting leadership on board. I guess that's always been a resource planning headache.
Yeah, I think from my past, working my way through team leader levels and management, the biggest, that is a real big problem, because somebody within the business will have the, understand the demand and the need of an application or something to help them do the job better. But the cost associated to how, can somebody trust that? You're paying a lot of money for something. Will it do the job we need? And there's a lot more doubt that comes in from that aspect, and say, well, we're doing okay at the moment on the spreadsheets or whatever it may be. So it's trying to just win over that. Try it before, almost try it before you buy if you could. But obviously it's never a quick project. So yeah, getting that buy-in is probably one of the hardest bits.
So we've got a couple more that I think will tie into topics you've talked about, Penny, before. Being restricted by local policies and dependencies, says Celandine. And we've got a couple of ones about forecasting. Fred says forecast capacity for chatting. And David says unexpected volume increases or unannounced marketing campaigns. So Penny, I know you're going to be covering that in a moment. So it's probably the right time now to hand across to you, Penny. And if you can take us through some of the best practices for workforce management, and I believe you're going to be starting with forecasting as one of your best practices.
Yes, I am. Actually, when we heard that list in the chat room, interesting that some of the ideas were some of the topics we're going to talk about today, kind of the age-old questions. On the forecasting side, just understanding. For example, marketing is planning a campaign and, oops, they forgot to tell us about it. Or forecasting for some of the new channels that are out there with the chat and various things. So forecasting is, the models are in place, things there, whether it's spreadsheets or workforce management software. But some of the difficulties are, getting those pieces of information we need about the business to better understand what's coming. So we're going to start off by looking at some forecasting topics, and there's so many things we could talk about related to forecasting. I'm not going to be going into the models and the steps and those numbers, but really want to talk about how to improve the accuracy and how to, number one, even calculate and observe the accuracy, but then a few things about what you can do to improve it, probably where it's going wrong. Second, we're going to look at staffing efficiencies, and we're always looking at how we can get more out of the staff we have. So one of the topics I wanted to touch on today was just looking for efficiencies through consolidation in large group versus small group economies. So we'll touch on that a little bit. Then the age-old question about, and then there were lots of chat comments about this one, about all the, just putting together the best set of schedules that fit everyone. We're trying to balance the workforce demands and what they want and this work-life balance and personal needs with coverage of the calls actually coming in. So we'll talk about some ways to optimize that coverage. Keeping the staff happy is another issue that's always the top of our minds. So we'll talk about what the agents care about and what that means in terms of schedule adherence and maybe some ways to help out on that. And then last, we're going to wrap up with all of this, whether it's at the forecasting stage, the staffing models and understanding Erlang, C and other models, getting the right schedules in place, tracking it throughout the day. I mean, all that can be done manually, but it's a very laborious, very time-consuming process and very, very, very prone to error. So we'll talk about ways to automate some of these things. So that's what's in store for the next about 50 minutes now that we have left. So let's begin with the forecasting piece. There are many, many, many models out there, and I'm actually doing a session at a conference next month where, for some reason, I agreed to talk about forecasting models. So I've been doing even more research into these recently. There are a number out there, and honestly, they're very difficult to understand. There are pages and pages of formulas, and it's pretty complicated. But the essence of all of them is that in some way it breaks down into three basic types. One's a point estimation, which is just so simple that the third week of February coming up will look like the third week of February last year. I mean, it's in essence just a point estimation approach. Doesn't take into account for long-term or short-term trend, not used very often in call centers. There are various averaging approaches and smoothing and all kinds of things that go along with this one. This is an approach that's okay sometimes when we're trying to forecast what's the handle time going to look like. But if there's very much change going on in your calls, either an upward or downward changes in major trends, averaging approaches don't really pick that up. So the model, the basic concept, and there are many, many different actual models, but we're looking at time series forecasting, which breaks apart the important components of what's driving future volumes. And that is primarily trend, the rate of change of the calls over time, and the seasonal impact. So if you have changes from month to month. Also cycles that may happen due to billing cycles or other cycles in your business. So most of the workforce management packages out there use some sort of time series approach. So it really is important to understand how all that works. I think it's useful, of course, being on the education side of the business, I think it's useful for everybody to understand those models and how they work. Even if you have tools to do it, I think it's good to understand what's going on in the background. But you can do all these things with pen and paper. Not many of our attendees are doing that, but you can do it with just pen and paper. Spreadsheets are very popular, but you're really getting the most sophistication, of course, and the automation in a workforce management system. Regardless of what system you use, it's very, very important that you're constantly looking at how good is the forecast, and that's where you're going to look at accuracy. There are no real, people always ask me the question, well, what's an acceptable accuracy? And my answer is it's never acceptable. It can always be a little bit better. So you want to be looking at the numbers to constantly see where you could have fine-tuned it a little bit more, see where you went wrong, and constantly get better at it. But first, you've got to know where the gaps are. So there are several ways to measure accuracy. And what I want to show you today is that the most common approach for measuring accuracy may not be giving you very good information, and why perhaps another approach is recommended. So in particular, we're going to look at these first two. First with percent difference, because that's the most common. So here we have a Monday through Saturday, the forecast volumes and actual, and you can see that the forecast is actually pretty good here. We've under forecast, I mean, every day, but not by a whole lot, really. I think most call centers would be pretty happy with this. But overall, at the end of the week, we're off by 3.9%. Like I said, most call centers would be pretty happy with that number. And we're at least off in the same direction every day. Now what we'd want to do is say, well, why were we off by this much on these days? Was it because the data being fed in was not quite accurate and representative? Was there a business reason that we didn't know about? So you'd want to investigate why that happened. But look at what can happen. Same approach here. But in this one, we have, if you look at that total, 15,552 compared to 15,445, oh my goodness, that's really accurate. We've done an amazing job forecasting here, right? It's less than 1% difference. So you may look at that, and I give this example simply because this is the way that many call centers look at their numbers. They're looking at the end of the week, what was our total calls forecast versus the actual, and you may end up with a result that looks like this. And in this case, it's less than 1%. But look at the numbers that drove that average. There are some days where you're way, way over. Other days you're way, way under. And it happens to average out. So a percent difference approach will sort of give you these kinds of numbers. So you really have to be very, very careful in using this approach. Certainly, if you're doing this and looking at a month's worth, there are all kinds of places for very high numbers and low numbers to hide, and then they get averaged out over time. So if you're doing it just on a monthly basis, definitely go down to weekly. If you're doing it on weekly, go down to a daily number to see how do we forecast for Monday overall. And then even within the day, you want to look at the intervals, because that's where the information lies that can pinpoint where you're off, and that's where you sit down to say, how can we get better? What could we have done differently to have made this forecast better? So another approach in looking at your forecast accuracy is to use standard deviation. So it's a pretty simple mathematical term and process that maybe everybody remembers from math class and statistics class, but essentially it's a way to measure the variation. And if we did this and looked at the variation of those numbers, it's huge. We would hope that our standard deviation is within maybe 1 or 2, and here it's 17. So such a wide variation here is really problematic to the business. It means that in some cases you're over forecast, you may have too many staff in place, you're spending needless money for staffing. On the other hand, you're way under in some cases, meaning you don't have enough staff planned, service is bad, occupancy is high, your costs are higher. So it can really drive some bad decisions with this much variation. If I saw that much variation in a forecast, I think something's really wrong. So either there was bad data, maybe you were using old data and there were a few days that were low for some reason, maybe just a glitch, maybe it was low, maybe data didn't get recorded and you forgot to adjust for that. That's typically what would drive that low forecast, or just missing data. Maybe you've got skewed handle time information. Maybe the agents in your center are just using the wrong buttons on their phone, and it's skewing your average handle time, which then skews your workload forecast, and everything else down the road is messed up. So, like I said, whenever you see these differences, you want to immediately say, why did it happen? Was it bad data being fed in, or was it an improper business assumption? And those can be very much off as well. Okay, the next thing we want to look at are opportunities for staffing efficiencies. We're all trying to do more with the staff we have in place, so where can we get even more out of them? So one of the things we look at is occupancy, and occupancy is simply a measure of how busy the staff are. And essentially it's workload hours divided by staff hours. So we want them busy. We are, after all, paying them to do this work, but we don't want them crazy busy. So what we're looking for here are groups that have low occupancy, where they're not getting a lot of calls coming in to handle, and therefore they're utilized not as high a percentage of the time as we would like. So one example of this, let's look at this example here. In the first line there, we have 100 calls arriving, equating to 10 hours of work. We decide for an 80-20 service level that we're going to need 14 people in place. So 10 divided by 14 is 71% occupancy. That's pretty low. They're sitting idle 29% of the time. So we'd want to look at what can we do to improve this. Well, one way to improve occupancy is to remove staff. With fewer staff handling the calls, everybody will be busier. But then we remove staff and service won't be as good. So it's not just that simple a matter of adjusting occupancy. But look at what would happen here. What if we had 5 of those groups, and you have 5 very specialized skills, and each one of those groups is getting 10 hours of workload within the hour. You've got 14 people sitting in each one of those groups. So it's 14 people times 5, or 70 people total, 5 specialized groups. Occupancy for all of them is 71%. Now, what if you said, hey, I can cross-train these people, and if I could get all of those calls all combined and coming in to a set of agents that have a universal skill set and they can handle all these types of calls, I could attack that 50 hours of workload as one big group rather than 5 sets of 10. And if all 50 hours are coming in as one big volume, I can handle that same work, same amount of work, at the same speed of answer with only 56 people. 56 compared to 70. That's a huge headcount savings. And again, I'm doing this with the same speed of answer. The reason I can do this is that when there's a bigger volume being offered to a group, there's a greater likelihood that when an agent is finished with one call, there's another one coming in right behind it for that person to handle. And therefore, everyone can be much more efficient. And therefore, if they're all more efficient, I won't need as many of them. So you see a staff occupancy there of 89%, 50 divided by 56. So that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for those occupancy rates to be in the high 80s. It's kind of ideal. They're busy, they're being utilized well, but not crazy busy. Like you wouldn't want to keep consolidating, so you got up into the 93 and 96% numbers. That's too much efficiency. Kind of an odd term, too much efficiency, but there really can be with the larger call centers and larger groups out there. So bottom line here is that you want to look for small groups with low occupancy and say, what can we do here to impact workload to make these groups more efficient? This really kind of points to some very basic skill-based routing ideas, and we've actually talked about this in previous webinars. But let's very simply say we've got 2 groups. I've got a group skill for customer service and one skill for sales. And I have 50 people sitting in each one of those. If I were to cross-train and train the service people to do sales, the sales people to do service, and had just one big set of calls coming in where anybody could handle anything, I could do that with only 80 people, providing the same speed of service. So that's an attractive headcount savings. But it makes a big broad jump there that, number one, I've got time and money to cross-train all these people, and I've got to train all 80 of them. Secondly, that the people are going to be A, interested, and B, willing, and C, capable of learning the other skill. It may be that some of those service people are going to be very uncomfortable with sales. Some of the sales people are not wanting to do service issues. So it may be that there's not interest or capability there. And I run the risk that a sales call comes in and it goes to a person who's primarily skilled for service and just kind of can do sales, and the call isn't really handled properly, or it takes much longer to handle the calls. So what do I do here? Is this a good solution or not? Well, typically the best solution is something in between. So you have still specialized service agents, still specialized sales agents, and we've gone out there and we've asked who's interested in picking up the other skill, who's willing, who's capable, and turns out there's 20 of them in this case, so that's a much more reasonable number to train. And now I have a group of people that really wanted to do this, and I'm making sure for the most part that a call gets to its specialized skill or someone that's been newly trained but is really capable in that. Now, I didn't get the full economies here. Before I had 100 agents, if I did a pure universal situation, I would have had 80. And in this case, I have 90. But I have accomplished some economies, and I'm getting calls to the right kind of person to handle the call, and the staff are happier. So it's really the best sort of solution. Now, doing this, Looked really simple in my little example here, but even when you have just a couple of skills, 2 or 3 skills, skill-based routing and skill-based scheduling and figuring it all out and how many of each skill and at what times of day suddenly becomes a much more difficult problem than you can do in a spreadsheet. And that's really a webinar topic of its own. I think we actually did one in the past. It may be archived out there somewhere. But this is one of the instances, too, where workforce management really unlocks all the potential of figuring out what's the best configuration to have in place and what schedules get put in place to really make it work.
And what we'll do, Penny, is we'll find out those webinars in the archive, and we'll add those onto the webinar page so people can follow up if they want to.
Okay, very good. Tip number 3 has to do with sort of going in a logical order. First we forecast, then we figure out how many people, how many staff, and what skills. And then we have to figure out the schedules to make all this work. And this, I think, is the most difficult part of workforce management, because we have, on the one hand, agents that want schedules to fit their needs. We have customers who are calling at all times of day, wanting immediate. We have senior management over here who doesn't really understand why we've asked for additional staff, and they walk through and there's a couple of people sitting not on a call. So they're wondering about the efficiency of this process. We also have supervisor concerns, HR's concerns, and so on. So balancing all this is very, very difficult. You couple that with having to adhere to both governmental, for some of you, rules and regulations, or at least your own internal rules and constraints about what schedules must do, whether they must start on the same time each day of week, or a person can only work X number of hours before a break, or their lunches must be at a certain amount of time. So the more constraints, the more difficult it is to come up with an absolutely optimal set of schedules. So I think we have a poll, Jonty, we wanted to put out there to ask about the most difficult thing our attendees are trying to do.
Yes, we've got a poll question, which is which of the following is the most difficult to accomplish in your own scheduling process? What do you find most difficult? Is it covering nights and weekends, accommodating agent schedule preferences, minimizing labor costs, or compliance with contracts? So we're just looking here for your top choice. What is your top choice on there? Is it nights and weekends, agent schedule preferences, labor costs, or complying with contracts? Joe, just like to share the voting here. And Penny, quite interesting here. 39% is accommodating agent schedule preferences, and 35% covering nights and weekends, 20% minimizing labor costs, and 6% compliance with contracts. So it looks like agent schedule preferences is probably the number one choice there.
Well, and it's nice to see that everyone's concerned about accommodating those, and certainly if the staff aren't happy, our customers aren't going to be happy. So it's important that those things be considered. On the other hand, you're running a business, and trying to accommodate when they'd like to work doesn't necessarily accommodate when your customers would like to call. So so that's kind of a tough one. I think we were also looking to have people send into the chat room some tips and ideas that have really worked well for accommodating that scheduling process and scheduling flexibility. I'm going to talk about a few ideas here, but if people can be sending those into the chat room, that would be great.
Okay, and so that's a good time for us to jump across to Megan, and Megan's on the news desk and has been watching the chat room coming through. So Megan, what have we got on the chat room?
Well, the chat room's been really busy, so I'll just take us through some of the tips and questions that we've had. This first tip is one that's probably quite good for Chris, really, that says, provide the business with ROI for good forecasting, scheduling and workforce management best practice. The decision makers will sit up and listen once they realise how much money is being lost through poor workforce management. So, Chris, is that a problem you come up with against quite a lot, trying to get the buy-in for workforce management software?
I beg your pardon, I coughed at the wrong moment. Was that the question for me, Megan?
Yes, yes, it was. Just struggling with
Great.
buy-in, really, for workforce management software. Is that a good strategy, do you think?
Well, it's a very good point, and I think that one of the beauties of workforce management is that it's actually relatively straightforward to measure the benefits, see before and after. And the business case has traditionally actually been quite strong for buying workforce management software. Of course, historically it was a big capital investment and required a strong business case to justify. I think that the prices of powerful software is coming down. The business case is actually, ironically, becoming easier. That's certainly been our experience.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think as we talk about justifying, software, the place to look is what we're talking about right now, though, is more efficient scheduling. While getting more accurate forecasts is important, sometimes you look at, well, we're going to automate all these tasks that someone's doing manually and save all that time. It still takes to run the software and to be attentive to it and to really get good results. So there's all that much headcount savings in terms of your workforce management labor. But where the headcount savings really is just analyzing so many different possibilities with scheduling that you just can't simply do with spreadsheets. So the key is analyzing lots and lots and lots of scheduling options to see what's going to be the best match for both the staff and for the workload. So that really takes us into some of these flexibility ideas. That is the one key word when it comes to scheduling, is you want more flexibility. So getting that means thinking outside of perhaps a full-time staff to adding more part-time. It's like building something with Lego blocks. The more different, smaller pieces and sizes you have, the better able you are to build your model precisely. Same thing with schedules. Some of you may not have part-time staff. Sometimes you can use full-time staff and create part-time sort of pockets of them. I know some organizations that take 4 hours out of the day of a full-time employee, and that 4 hours they get them whenever they want them in the call center, and the other 4 hours they're doing something different in the business. So you're sort of taking a full-time person, creating part-time schedule hours for the call center.
Megan, I see there's a number of questions coming about historic data and spikes.
Yeah, we've had a tip come in from Alex saying it's really important to inspect your historic data. It must be adjusted to remove spikes in data which are impacted by non-demand factors, e.g. system issues. Otherwise, the trends will not show correctly. We've had an opinion in from Christine, who also agrees, really, saying understanding and noting call drivers and propensity to contact is key to good forecasting. So, Dean, it really seems that drilling down into as much detail as possible is key to getting this right.
I would definitely agree. I think going back to that last question about, or comment about the analysing your history, that really does scream out and links this perfectly. We always recommend looking at ideally about a 15-minute interval basis, because you get more feel for when the delivery happens. 10 calls within an hour, you don't know if at the start of the hour, the end of the hour, wherever they're distributed, having the 15 breakdown, far more refined distribution patterns, trends, even handle times per interval can vary as well. So you get a very great, very good, strong forecasting off the back of it and the staffing demand.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. We've had another tip in from Emma saying split out different channels with different call drivers so the fluctuations can be seen and not hidden. And also don't group all call types into one calculation. And we've had another tip in from David, who says in regards to workforce management, we monitor average handling time but don't have goals assigned to this statistic. We've moved to measuring after work time as a percentage of the average handling time. And we found that our agents don't feel as though they need to rush customers off the phone, but instead are reducing their after work time. Versus a department, we're seeing a natural reduction in average handling time. Sorry, and I think that's all we've got time for, John T.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll pass the baton back to Penny, and I think you're going to take us through some ideas about how you plan for flexibility.
Absolutely, and one of the tips, and I don't remember whose name was associated with that, but the one about in terms of forecasting, it's very, very important that even though you're going to be combining perhaps skills maybe down the road, if you look at staffing efficiencies and scheduling, it is very important at the forecasting stage that you have those separate. So that was an excellent tip, I thought, about the need to break those apart by channel, absolutely, but also by skill at the early stages to the degree that you can determine what kind of call it was, what kind of skill was needed. We need that broken apart at that.
Yeah, that was Emma who sent that tip in.
Okay, I think that's an excellent point that doesn't get brought out often enough, and people kind of miss that. And just because there's 3 skills combined and it's coming into one big group, and that's kind of how we've skilled and scheduled people, those kinds of things can change. They always want to break that back apart at the forecasting stage up front. Very good comment there. Okay, we had started to move into the area of what about the schedules now and the need for flexibility. So full-time options, flexibility, you'd be surprised sometimes at what difference there may be in the pattern from a Monday to a Tuesday to a Friday. So if you can adjust schedules to accommodate that different sort of start to each day, not saying that everybody needs to start at a different time every day of week, but if you have just a few people that are willing to start at 7:30 a.m. one day and 8:30 another day and then back to 7:30, if you have some people with that kind of flexibility, that can really help you match up to the workload demand. Flexible breaks and lunches is another thing. If you're not completely wedded to must have a break after 2.5 hours on the phones, if that could be a bigger window of time so you can place that break wherever it's optimal in terms of the workflow, that's really nice. Same thing with lunches. Same thing with even different definitions of the lunch period. I think the call centers that have the most success in scheduling have a big variety of lunch options. Some people may want a full, typically an hour for lunch. Some may want 45 minutes, 30 minutes, and out of the call center at the end of the day. And then we'll even have some do a really long lunch in the middle of the day. I think someone has just changed their telephone part. I'm getting some feedback there. I think, okay. But even having something like one call center does, I think, a really creative thing. They have a lot of young workforce in their contact center, and they have what they call the fitness schedule, and essentially it's about a 3-hour break in the middle of the day. And these people take their long lunch break and they go to a nearby gym and work out, and there's a group of them that go do this and train and then come back. And essentially what that has created is a split shift, which is a very attractive kind of schedule for a contact center, but we tend to think that no one would want to work that. Well, if you can come up with a reason for that big split in the middle of the day, suddenly it becomes much more attractive. Split shifts are also more possible than you might think if you have staff working from home. Remote agents are, it's becoming more and more of a reality for more and more companies. It's grown so much over the last 5 to 10 years. I think a little bit more so here in the U.S., but really taking off on your side of the pond as well, I think. But that can be a great combination. Again, not all agents have to work from home, but if you have some, and those are the people that can give you the flexibility. Those are the people that perhaps can indeed work that split shift. They can work a few hours in the morning, be off in the afternoon, perhaps when call volumes have dropped a little bit, and then back online in the evening when it's hard to do that transition into your night shift. So the key here is that you really just have to be creative. Look at when the calls are arriving and how can you make a schedule match that. Another example we have on the slide here. It's a very popular schedule and a great efficiency schedule when you have workload that is higher on Mondays than the other days of the week, and then it drops down a little on Tuesday and then lower on Wednesday, and so it declines throughout the week. Common workload pattern. Some call centers have schedules to match that. They call it a slant schedule, where someone works 10 hours on Monday, 9 on Tuesday, 8 on Wednesday, 7 Thursday, and 6 on Friday, looking forward to working fewer hours as the week goes on. So by Friday, they're really happy with that 6-hour schedule. You have to, of course, check work rules, both governmental work rules and your company's work rules. But if you can make that happen, that's a really good fit. And there will be a few people that would love to have that schedule. So that's the key, is you have to look at your workload, figure out its pattern, and say, how can I create a schedule that matches that? It doesn't have to be for everyone in the center. You can create kind of the normal ones to cover the base of workload. But for those odd variations, think about what schedule matches that, and don't be afraid to try new things. But once again, that's really where scheduling software comes into play in terms of helping you, number one, figure out the options, understanding the demand curve, trying out new schedules at a simple push of the button, and seeing how the matchup works, then going out to the staff to say, hey, would anyone be interested in this kind of option? But you have to have the ability to test all those things to really know what that best set of options is going to be. So do we have any other ideas coming into the chat room about scheduling ideas, creative methods for matching up workforce to workload? I think most of the content in chat was based on our earlier talk about forecasting, so we'll give you a little bit of time to send in some ideas about scheduling and what's worked well for you.
And we're going to be picking that up in a few minutes' time, Penny.
Okay. Okay. Next item, I think we have another poll, Jonty, but we're going to look at which of these things do you think has the highest correlation with customer satisfaction?
Yeah, we're going to launch a poll, and the choice is a bit of a quiz rather than a poll. What's got the highest correlation with customer satisfaction? Is it first call resolution, service level, average handle time, employee satisfaction, or internal quality score? So if you just like to pick which one do you think has the highest correlation with customer satisfaction. So just like to vote on those. I think we've got almost everyone in now, and I will share the answer with you, Penny. So here you are. It is, the audience say 77% first call resolution, 11% service level, 9% employee satisfaction, 3% average handling time, and funnily enough, internal quality scores has got no votes, which I thought was a bit of a surprise. I would have expected to see something a little bit higher from that level. So, Penny, the audience has picked the answer for first call resolution. Do you think they're right?
They are absolutely right. We have a smart audience today. This is an interesting, surveys have been done by surveying organizations, as well as there are some organizations that take their customer satisfaction scores and then kind of match it up to when did that customer call, what was the service level then, what was the average handle time, and so on. And absolutely, far and away, what customers care about most is first call resolution. Our group here has indicated that service level is the next thing in line, and interestingly enough, there's not a very high correlation between service level and customer satisfaction, which might suggest that I think customers don't care so much if they wait 10 seconds or 20 or 30 or even 60. Now, they do care if wait time is very, very, very high. There is correlation between high wait times and customer dissatisfaction. But it suggests that how crazed we get about 80-20 or 80-30 or whatever, if it's 20 seconds, if it's 30, if it's 40, as long as my call is handled well, I kind of don't care. It's not that I don't care, but I don't remember or it's not as important to me as did my call get resolved. But what's interesting in the survey that was done is that the following actually a very close second behind first call resolution was employee satisfaction. And that really makes sense, I think. The happier your employees are, the happier they are, the more they're going to do to take care of your customers. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of our employees, that we're really in tune with employee satisfaction. So I'm a big proponent of doing employee satisfaction surveys. Your company may do employee satisfaction surveys periodically. I'm surprised, honestly, at the number that don't do this regularly. But those that do, the satisfaction survey tends to be one done by the covers all areas of the business. And frankly, there are a lot of things that happen in the contact center that are so unique and different in the way someone is asked to work. I mean, we're so intense about, you know, schedules and adherence, and we watch their behavior so closely, and so there are a lot of things that make in the contact center different than other areas of the business. And I think we need satisfaction surveys to really sort of assess those kinds of things. So, you know, asking them about how they like their work schedule, maybe not the schedule itself, but the process of getting that schedule. How closely does it accommodate their personal needs and their work-life balance? Are they getting enough training? What about the reward and recognition program? Relationship with their supervisor, the tools and resources they have in place. So we want to do these surveys regularly to make sure that we're keeping our staff happy. And a couple of things that really matter to them are, again, a schedule that supports their work-life balance. Part of what they care about there, too, is the predictability of that schedule and the ease at which they can check it and perhaps make changes and trade schedules and swap around and so on. That's really important to them. So the more we can empower them and put more and more control in their hands, and I think that ties in with the, you know, the now we're getting even cheaper rates on mobile phones. What else can we do to put on that phone to make their lives easier? And that's actually one of the things, Chris, I'm going to let you talk about here is a mobile phone app that allows people to do a lot of things as it relates to their schedule, you know, check it, make trades, do all that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, or Dean at this point, I think.
So we've passed across to Chris, if you'd like to take yourself off mute, and take us through how to automate some workforce management tasks. Thank you, Penny.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much, Penny. Great stuff. Yes, I mean, what we've been talking about in the chat room is very much what this next section is really about addressing. And there's an interesting conversation going on in the chat room about the payback and the cost justification for automating workforce management tasks. So we talked about, you know, the need for more accurate forecasts. Now, it's amazing what, as we said earlier, what you can do with a spreadsheet, but the workforce management system, of course, will automatically connect to your ACD or other data sources, whether it's an email system, whatever, to save you the bother and the error-prone task of typing numbers into a spreadsheet. With a couple of clicks, the workforce management system will produce very efficient schedules. So Penny talked about the difficulty in using something like Excel to put those Lego bricks in the right place at the right time. A good workforce management system will do that for you very efficiently and very quickly with very little effort. And if you can align supply and demand, so you've got the right number of people on duty at the right time, you're going to deliver both efficiency gains, because you'll be avoiding periods of overstaffing, which are obviously a waste of money, but you'll also be minimizing periods of understaffing, which are bad for customer experience. We talked about, you know, workforce management automation reducing effort on the part of planners. That is true, but it doesn't usually mean that fewer planners are needed. You know, there are some industry standard ratios of number of planners per number of agents, and that doesn't tend to go down when there's a workforce management system. Rather, what it does is to enable the planners to spend more time thinking strategically, liaising with other departments, marketing as a department springs to mind, so we don't have any nasty surprises when new campaigns are launched, and to basically do a better job. So the workforce management tool is an enabler, enabling technology for the planner rather than a replacement. Finally, better schedule adherence. We talked about smartphones and agents having access to their to their schedules and go through holiday requests on smartphones. That's great for agent satisfaction, but it also drives scheduled adherence because agents have got a reminder on the device they carry with them all the time, their smartphone, of when they've got a break coming up. Usually not a reminder needed for that, but when the next shift is due to start. Things like that. Now, the workforce management market is a very competitive one. It never stands still, and all the players in that market are always innovating. What we'd like to do now is to give you a quick look at some of the innovations we've introduced recently. So we're going to look at planning for all channels, not just inbound calls, so looking at planning for emails, chats, and other media. We're going to look at how quickly and easily we can produce optimized schedules for a multi-skilled workforce. Now, as Penny mentioned, multi-skill scheduling really is worthy of a webinar all unto itself. We did one a couple of years ago, and Jonty's kindly going to make that available to everybody today. That might be interesting reading. But the key thing is, multi-skill planning is really quite a difficult mathematical challenge. It's one of those circular problems. She always show you how the results can be produced and how you can use a good workforce management tool to manage a multi-skilled workforce properly. And finally, we'll have a quick look at this agent portal, which is accessible on any size screen, any device. So let's have a quick look at the software in action, if I can hand over to Dean.
Dean, over to you.
Thank you, Jonty. Sorry, I was on mute there, sorry. I think Chris's last 3 bullet points summarise really what I'm going to show you very quickly. The first one is you need to be able to plan and build your requirements ready for your scheduling based on a multi-activities, we would call it. So you can see here I've got 3, as you can see on this row here, if I try and highlight it blue, we've got what we call our queues. So this is your data pots where you're forecasting for. So I've got things like inquiries, calls, web chats, back office documents. But within Jigsaw we have this nice little calculation methods where, as you can see by the box above where you've got like Erlang, C, chat and linear, these are separate requirement calculations, and what they do is they specifically target, like especially the web chat there, they are like calls. The only difference is you have overlaps between one to another, and maybe you can handle multiples at one time. Now a lot of tools can do those requirements separately. Within Jigsaw we can actually build that into like a multi-activity. So for here we have call bind on shift. So if somebody's on shift, depending on their skill mix, they could be in 1, 2, or even all 3 of these activities, one after the other. So we can build that requirement calculation all into one big picture or break, and you can still see the breakdown separately. So if I just go to my screen behind now, this is a piece we've run previously, but you can probably see on the bottom section where we've got the green lines, these are the requirements per interval of a day. Now I've just zoomed out a little bit to half-hour intervals here, but you can zoom right into 15, and you can see just by doing that multi-skilling, even on a low volume basis, I've got 3 phone lines here. Separately, they would have needed 6 people in that 1/4 of an hour. But by doing that multi-skilling, we've saved 1 headcount in that first interval alone. So across a whole day, we've easily saved maybe 2, 3, 4 headcount that could be used elsewhere on other days or different times maybe to bolster that service level up. They can get that quality to your customers without burning your agents out as well. And as you can see, if I go to coverage here, the system also, once it's scheduled, you can actually see where your coverage is. And if you start ring-fencing people out, these green lines will actually start reducing as you remove the skills from people. So if I hover over somebody, for example, see a little pop-up there, who are we on here? Callum here has 3 skills. He can do all 3 of those activities. If we're to ring-fence him for one, you're reducing that capacity for the other 2 skills instantly. And you can spot skill gaps, not just staffing gaps on here as well. So, i.e., saving recruitment costs, just a couple of hours worth of training might upskill somebody. So it's identifying those gaps. Now the last bit, as Chris mentioned, is the lovely agent browser. So here we go. This is, like Chris said, this will work on any device anywhere. So any agent can log in from home. As you can see, if I change the screen to like an iPhone sort of aspect ratio, it goes down the page. but all their information is here, and they can control what you allow them to. So you can see, they can see what I'm meant to be doing right now, the items afterwards, the next 7 days, the up-and-coming events. But as you can see, they only see what you allow them to see as well. From this, you can see I'm published after this week. But any special events highlight themselves, so like annual leave, meetings, training, so they've got that nice snapshot of the world instantly. Within here also, like Chris said, you know, they can see a more detailed breakdown on a day, week or month basis, but they can also subscribe to their schedule here onto a calendar on their phone. So as updates happen, the calendar updates in their phone and the alerts work on their phone. So if they're at home or travelling to work or on lunch, they get alerts to go back into the office, or their lunch is coming up to leave the office. It's always on everywhere they go. And obviously the last part on here, obviously if they want any time off or shift swaps, that can all be handled here, and you can allow them to do not just holiday, but maybe like request their maternity leave, paternity leave. Whatever you build into the system is just, you know, easy access for the agents to get involved and give their feedback to you. We've also got another feature coming out soon with availability. So people can only work certain times, maybe during school holidays. They can tell you that well in advance, so you can plan that into the, you know, into the scheduling that you do. Overall, involving them to improve your service and your customers', you know, experience in the business itself. Okay, Jonty, I believe it's back over to Chris now.
Thanks, Dean. All right, very quickly, just to
Chris, do you have to take us?
Am I on air?
You are indeed, Chris.
Great stuff, thanks, Jonty. And thanks, Dean. So just to let you know that we'll be looking at having a quick cameo appearance by Injixo Workforce Management there, which Dean kindly showed us. The good news is that award-winning workforce management, for that's what Injixo is, now costs less than you might think. In fact, it costs just £9 per user per month, and that's an all-inclusive price. There's no need for a big IT project. You know, IT's involvement, since the whole thing is accessed via a browser, IT's involvement is normally measured in minutes or hours rather than days or weeks. So that's good news in a, you know, highly occupied IT team. There are no gotchas, no optional extras. It turns out weren't in the box. Batteries included price. There's no setup fee. A full training program is included, and there's no minimum term. So it's possible for companies to try it, and if they don't like it for any reason or no reason, pull the plug. Pleased to say we have a vanishingly small churn rate at Injixo, so we must be doing something right. Very rarely that people execute that exit option. There's a minimum uptime guarantee, which we've had in place since we launched in 2011, and to date we've never come anywhere near breaching that. And because it's a cloud application, it's been continuously developed. It's not waiting for annual big bang update, which then requires another IT project to install. Customers get access to the innovations as soon as they're released. Highly secure. There's a long list of alphabetic spaghetti, including PCI DSS, which cover the data security and privacy. And being so cheap, and an ongoing expense rather than a big capital purchase, OPEX versus CAPEX, the business case that we were talking about earlier is usually very strong, very easy to get that through. Finally, because it's pay-as-you-go, you can flex capacity up and down as needed. So if you have a seasonal business with maybe a retailer with a Christmas peak, you don't need to buy a lot of software for your peak capacity, just buy it for the months that you need it. So aligning your outgoings with your revenues.
Wonderful.
Finally,
thank you very much for that, Chris. We've just got a couple of time for, I think we just take 3 quick tips from the chat room. So Megan, what are the tips we've got?
Okay, we've got a tip coming from David who said, ask the agents what they want. You may be surprised by what kind of creative ideas they have concerning their own schedules. And then we've got another one from Louise who said, we aim for 60% agent choice and 40% business needs as a new scheduling process. And a final one then from Amy who said, we have recently trialled floating working patterns and this has worked really well. Similar to bank staff but with minimum contracted hours. It has really helped us when we have spikes in sickness and call volumes.
So I think that ties in. Thank you very much. I think that last one ties in very well with a a point that Penny made earlier. Well, unfortunately, we're up to the top of the hour. So in 1 or 2 words, if you could put into the chat room, what did you like best about today's webinar? You can get copies of the slides and watch the replay on callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. And just remains for me to thank our 3 guest speakers. Penny Reynolds, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
It was great to be here, Jonty. Thank you.
Dean, thanks for joining us and showing us the demonstration.
No problem at all, Jonty. Thank you.
And Chris, as ever, thank you very much for providing your valuable insight into workforce management software. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks a lot. You're welcome.
And just like to say thank you to everyone in our audience. We're taking a break next week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Thank you, everyone, and don't forget to complete the survey as you leave the web.